Cool. So I'm Dan Adelman, and I help indies release games on Nintendo platforms. So as Brian said, I'm a big fan of indie games. Have been for quite a while, and I'll go into a little bit more about some of the history with Nintendo and indies and my background as well. But really, it's something that we've been working with indies for a long time, but really haven't been all that forthcoming in terms of broadcasting how to go about it. So a lot of times there are a lot of developers that are working on cool things and will proactively reach out to them. Or if a developer already knows somebody at Nintendo or knows me personally, they can figure out how to do it. But what I think we need to do a lot better of a job of is explaining to people who are not already working with Nintendo how to get involved. So for those of you not familiar, Nintendo has two current-gen platforms that we're working on. Our handheld, the Nintendo 3DS, and our console that we just launched this past holiday, the Wii U. And both of them have digital distribution platforms called the eShop. And so on the 3DS side, you might be familiar with some games like Gunman Clive and Colors 3D and Mutant Mudds and Fractured Soul, those kinds of games. And on the Wii U, we have games like Runner 2, Chasing Aurora, Little Inferno, all kinds of indie sport. So it's kind of funny, a lot of times when people have seen some of the recent releases, some of those games that I just mentioned, a lot of times the comments in the online forums is usually very positive, and they're saying, wow, it's great that Nintendo is finally opening up and willing to work with indies. And as I mentioned before, we actually have a pretty long history of working with indies. All of the games up here really got their start on Nintendo platforms, with the exception of Cave Story, of course, was a freeware application that was released just on its own. But so WiiWare was the first commercial release of that, and VVVVVV was also released on PC first. But generally, there was a lot of kind of blue chip major indie games that got their start on Nintendo platforms, and we really want to continue growing that. So this talk really is focused on very tactical, kind of answering some questions that I think are lingering out there, kind of an FAQ, or breaking down some common misconceptions about how best to work with Nintendo, and then talk very tactically about here's step by step how you go through it. And I'm gonna get to the process in just a minute. But here first, let me go through what the policies are and what the terms and conditions kind of are. We don't have any concept approvals, never have. So our philosophy has always been that there really is ultimately, in the digital distribution world, there's no real difference between a developer and a capital P publisher. So in the same way, if EA were to approach us and say, we're ready to make this year's Madden, we would never say to them, well, you just made one last year. Do we really need another football game? Of course, that would be crazy. We would never do that. And so likewise, if a developer who's working on Nintendo platforms is the one taking the risk and wants to make a game, that should be totally their call. So we've never had any kind of green light process or anything like that. Likewise, I've heard from time to time from developers that they might say, yeah, I've got this game, I think it would be really great on Nintendo systems, except, I really don't think motion controls would work really well with it, or on the 3DS, it wouldn't look very good in 3D, and just in case there was any confusion about that, we don't require that. We don't require the use of basically any of the feature sets. So we're always we're hoping that a lot of people will take inspiration from some of the new features that we've added, like the second screen for the Wii U or 3D or the Miiverse, but really that's completely up to you. Likewise, we don't have any requirements that you have to, if you don't ship on our platform first, then you can't ship on our platform at all. That's just kind of childish. It's we don't charge for law check. Law check, by the way, is what everyone else in the world calls certification. So we also have a certification process at the end, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But we don't charge for that. Never have. Easy to update. So if you decide you find a bug later, after you release the game, or you want to add new features, you can do that. This one is a common misconception based on some actual policies that we have had in place. So I just wanted to talk about this because this often seems like one of the bigger stumbling blocks for working on Nintendo platforms, which is that when we first launched WiiWare back in the day, we really wanted to take that mindset of the developer is in control of their own destiny, and they can self-publish and they can release whatever they want. Everyone can do whatever they want, subject, of course, to some rational guidelines, like we don't allow advergaming and that kind of thing. But we also, at the same time, were really concerned about becoming a dumping ground for shovelware. And so we had a mechanism where we said, all right, you have to believe enough in your game that you're going to expect to sell a certain number of units, or you don't qualify for royalties. And so the intent behind it was somewhat noble, but in practice, it didn't really work. So after WiiWare, for all subsequent platforms, DSiWare, 3DS, Wii U, eShop, they're basically you get revenue from Unit 1. Speaking of revenues, I didn't get the green light to talk about the specific rev share, but it's competitive and probably what you would guess. You are able to work from home if you want. This is actually a new development. We used to have a requirement that in order to become a licensed Nintendo developer, you had to work out of an office that was separate from your home, and we actually had people who would look it up in Google Maps and make sure it wasn't in a residentially zoned area, which, and the rationale behind that made sense when the rule was made 20 years ago, before there was internet and Skype and all kinds of things like that. So we really wanted to make sure that when people applied to become a licensed developer, that we weren't imposing our own judgment into the equation. We really wanted to say, have some objective criteria. Who actually can make games on our system? And there are some issues about technical competence and ability to keep confidential information secure. And so, the shorthand was, all right, well, if you work out of an office, you're probably legit. And that's really no longer the case. So now we've changed the requirements to reflect more accurately what we're really going after. This one was, I'm putting this in here just because this was something that apparently caused some confusion, and I'm not sure where that confusion came from, but some people seem to think that you actually have to have an office or a business presence in a certain country in order to release games there, and that's not the case. So if you live in Canada, you can release games throughout Europe, and of course in the United States, and so it really doesn't matter where you live. The only distinction here is that Asia is its own category, primarily because of customer support and tax law issues. So releasing games in Japan, in particular, you do have to have a business presence in Japan, but everywhere outside of Asia, you can release games throughout. This is a new change that happened with the advent of Wii U. So we switched our business model from one where we act as the retailer, in which case, by law, we really have to set price, and we're limited in how much we could discuss price, and we had to control it, to one where we are essentially acting as your agent. And in acting as your agent, you have full control over release date and price. You can change price whenever you want. So we're also really trying to make it easier to make games on Wii U. So at GDC, we announced that we have some new tools for developing games in JavaScript and HTML5, and I think that's really great for prototyping, rapid prototyping, just getting a game idea out there, and just trying to see, like, you know, I've got this cool idea for a dual screen game. Will it work? Will it be fun? And then likewise, we also support Unity Pro 4. There's, I'm not sure how many people in this room are aware, but we actually have an arrangement with Unity where essentially Nintendo has covered all of the licensing fees for Unity on our platform. So Unity Pro 4 on Wii U is free. Yeah, that's usually a pretty popular one. So the process is actually really simple, and it's really designed to work in a way that you shouldn't need to know somebody at Nintendo. You shouldn't have to worry about figuring out how do you navigate across this, you know, really large company. There's a step-by-step process, and wow, this looks really bad in VGA. So I'll see if I can get the text out to everybody. So this is completely illegible, unfortunately. So on the far left, this is starting from a point of having absolutely no relationship with Nintendo, becoming a licensed developer, and ultimately at the far right, launching your game. And I should actually add one more chevron at the end, because launching your game is not, as we all know, the end of the story. So there's other things like community management, and I can talk a little bit about that, and updating your game. So the first step in the process is becoming a licensed developer. And to do that, go to Wii U, that's WIIU developers.nintendo.com. And there's a questionnaire there that you can fill out, and that'll be a little bit bigger on an upcoming slide, so you can actually see it. And the main things we are looking for to verify if you're a bona fide developer is game development experience, and by virtue of the fact that you're sitting in this room, you can assume that you qualify. We're really trying to screen out junior high school kids who have a great idea for the next Zelda game. So really, if you know how to make a game, if you're currently working on a game, that's essentially all you really need. Another thing is just some ability to keep confidential information secure. Again, if you have a door with a lock on it, that is essentially all we need. And then the last one, which might be a little bit of a hurdle, is you do have to form some kind of corporate entity. And I know in the US that's super easy. I think it costs less than $200 to set yourself up as a corporation. Even if you're an individual, you can set yourself up as a sole proprietorship. I'm not sure how difficult that is in Canada, but it's generally not that difficult, and we need that for tax purposes when we pay you, which hopefully we're doing a lot of. The next step is after you get set up as a licensed developer, you can get a dev kit. Dev kits are about the cost of a gaming PC. So a decent high-end PC shouldn't break the bank, and if it helps you justify it, it comes with Unity Pro 4, so you can kind of think of it that way. There is a step in there where you submit something called a project sheet, and The point of that is really to, again, it's not a concept approval process. It's really to get it in our database. This is also the point where we might try to catch something if it is in violation of some of the concept guidelines. So things like I said, advergaming is a big one. If you want to do the Coca-Cola basketball shootout challenge, I would probably say, wow, I'm glad we caught that early because we don't allow that. Then you make the game, pretty self-explanatory. And then you submit the game to the lot check process. And I would assume that that will take you about 2 to 3 weeks to get through for one pass. You may actually have to go through it a couple of times. And really the lot check process is not intended to be Nintendo QAing your game. It's really just to verify that you have in fact done the QA of your game. And also we test against our programming guidelines. So things like if your game uses a Wii Remote and Nunchuck and the Nunchuck becomes detached, then the game should pause and put up a message saying, please plug the Nunchuck back in. So it's common sense things like that, but we test through and make sure that everything's running the way it's expected to. Also, while it's in LotCheck, that's also our cue to reach out to you and get all the assets we need to build up your page, things like screenshots, trailers, and anything you want for your game. We'll provide you with a list of here's all the things we need and all the dimensions and all of that. And then once we have everything we need, again, you can set your release date, you can set your price. General best practice is I would recommend setting your release date about 3 weeks or more out from once we have everything. And that gives, there's 2 reasons for that. One is it gives our eShop team, the merchandising team, some time to plan out how they want to position the game and make sure that they can give it proper visibility. So if it's just thrown in their lap at the last minute, they may not be able to do something with it. And then also about 2 weeks before the launch of your game, we'll send you a bunch of codes that you can then distribute to media, and they can write up their reviews, and so they'll have access to it. And media tend to like being able to try things before everyone else, so that when their review comes out, it's actually news. And then the game launches, and I mentioned, I already talked about updates, but one thing also I'll mention about post-launch is that I'm not sure how many people have played around with the Wii U yet, but there's a feature in there called Miiverse, which is a social network that's integrated into the platform, and a lot of game developers, especially indie game developers, have had a lot of success of going into those communities where people are actively talking about their game and getting to know their fans and engaging with their fans and answering questions, and it's just a really great way of building up community. So again, here's the URL in a little bit more bigger font so you can actually see it now. I should mention for 3DS, if you're primarily interested in 3DS, you can start here anyway. But we also have another developer portal called WarioWorld.com, which is actually in the process of being modernized. It hasn't been touched in a long time, so that's why we're directing people to this new site. But by the end of the year, everything should be nice and shiny. And then, then fill out project sheets and get started. And, again, it really shouldn't be the case that, people get stopped at the point of, wow, Nintendo's a big company and I really have no idea where to get started. So these should be great ways to get started. But if you do get stuck, here's my personal email address. I will do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. If I am traveling or I'm bogged down, there's also a larger team, so it's definitely not just me. Third-party publisher at noa.nintendo.com, but if you really want to make sure you know who the person is on the other side, feel free to contact me at any time. And I'll see you around the rest of the show. Thanks.